Time and consciousness. Physics would love to solve the problem. The truth is, physics itself, as a science, is lost. It will never address time and consciousness properly until it finds itself. Slide repeat. Physics is abysmally, sadly, badly lost. The problem is time. I'm picking this discussion as a prime example of a myriad of others that could be looked at. Here we have three physicists, Bernard Carr, Lee Smolin, George Ellis, and a neuroscientist heavily schooled by physics, no pun intended, Jonathon Schooler. Their problem, how to reconcile physics' concept of time, namely the static black universe of special relativity, to our fundamental experience, that is, ever-changing events. Something like this: the dynamic, continuous, ever-flowing experience of coffee stirring, which is certainly not static, in which they kind of understand is also the hard problem of consciousness. Kind of. Their real problem, their incomprehensibly inconsistent current interpretation of special relativity, over which they are all totally in one accord. Now, we're not going to go through all the problems with special relativity. Been there, done that. But we want to see physicists' attempts using this as a basis, their attempts at consciousness. So let's take a look. The first presenter in this conference is George Ellis, Emeritus Distinguished Professor of Complex Systems in the Department of Mathematics, Applied Mathematics, Cape Town, South Africa. Worked with Stephen Hawking, co-authored a book with him. Definitely a physicist. So in the black universe of special relativity, there is no becoming. Universal becoming requiring, as the picture shows, the growth of that block, three-dimensional block, in time, instant by instant, along a plane of simultaneity, where everything is present for all observers, where that on each plane is an instant that's the instant of the present for all observers. But because of relative motion, therefore the relativity of simultaneity, there's no plane of universal becoming, a plane where everything is in the present for all observers. Planes x and y in relative motion have different planes of simultaneity. So something for x is in the future, or something in the past for y. Not a common plane of simultaneity. Everything is frozen per this logic, per this picture. Past, present, future in one static block. Therefore, experience, ever-changing, is an illusion. Somehow you have to explain the illusion. Dr. Ellis knows to square with our conscious experience, we must go back to universal becoming, therefore the plane of the common present, which is to say we must rid ourselves of this relativistic conception, ditch the frozen block universe. How does he do this? He discusses initially how engineers demonstrate that the special relativity feature of the relativity of simultaneity is true. We'll come back to this engineer's vision. For now, suffice it to say, in essence, he does not refute it, he just does an end around to this. He says, in the general theory, going to the general theory, Lorentz group symmetry is broken. Now, that Lorentz group symmetry is the reciprocity of the two observers in motion applying the changes of time units and space units to each other. It forms a mathematical group, a closed system. But in general theory, he says any coordinate system is allowed. Therefore, the special relativity argument does not apply. In general relativity, general covariance is broken in specific solutions. Standard universe models have preferred space sections and timelines. So any coordinate system isn't actually absolved, or allowed, but moving on. We don't need to go into the problems of general relativity here or into covariance. Just register this statement. The special relativity argument does not apply. Interesting. So what happens to these? Physics explanation of the Michelson-Morley experiment via special relativity as a measurement effect. That is, the Michelson-Morley apparatus arm is not truly changing, just a measurement effect, truly expanding or contracting. That helped destroy the concept of the ether. Important aspect of physics right now. So where did that go? Special relativity's explanation of longer living muons and clocks slowed on jets in the half-Keating experiment. The supposed confirmations of special relativity. What happened to those if the SR argument does not apply? I have no idea. To me, this is just trying to bulldoze special relativity out of the way without ever coming to grips with its fundamental nature and its fundamental problem. We'll just appeal to the general theory. By the way, another way they would love to make special relativity go away is decide that light has a variable velocity once for all. It's not invariant. But then we go right back to this. So what happened to these explanations if you just ditch relativity that way, special relativity? What I fear, frankly, is they're going to do something like this and never come to grips with the problem. I can just feel it. Dr. Ellis introduced the relativity of simultaneity of special relativity with the way, quote, engineers treat it, unquote. For example, I send a radar signal out, strike a mirror, comes back, equal distance, equal times. The space-time diagram would look as such. And I'd get a surface of simultaneity where the event at halftime at the 1 second mark there is simultaneous with the reflection event. But what if we are moving? The mirror is moving away from the outgoing signal, and we're moving towards the returning signal. So we're going to get a different diagram. To correspond with the half or equal times point, the reflection event must be on a different plane of simultaneity as such. And so we're right back to the original diagram. Different planes of simultaneity, different paths and different futures for the observers in relative motion. Note, without this relativity of simultaneity, this space-time block does not exist, this static block. We have reified the relativity of simultaneity as a feature of the movement of time in the universe. So the relativity of simultaneity in Dr. Ellis's example seems inescapable. But the physicists are always thinking in terms of point events, instances, Bergson noted. Let's take a slightly different situation. I treat this as my system. I've got a switch, a light bulb, 2 mirrors. I send an EM wave in each direction, bounce them back. Both waves must strike a switch simultaneously to turn on the light bulb. Space-time diagram looks as such. The light bulb turns on. But this is a simultaneous causal flow, and it cannot be relativized. The light bulb will not go away as an event because some observer moving by says, I'm the one in motion, he's stationary, therefore the striking of the mirrors cannot be simultaneous. The light bulb event is not going to go away. This is a simultaneous causal flow. These flows cannot be relativized. Just as the organic simultaneous growth pattern of a rose cannot be relativized. Those petals will strike those 2 X's simultaneously. I could use those to turn on the light switches if I wanted to. If it is relativized, you would distort, destroy somehow, make it look quite different, the ultimate pattern of and growth and looks of the rose. So 2 understandings are necessary. And by the way, before I say that, when I made that extended system, one will see relativists talking about extended systems as trying to solve problems, but then you have no principle to stop the extension and run that system through the entire universe. So 2 understandings are necessary. Special relativity can only explain measurement effects, not real ontological effects, such as the longer lifespan of muons or actual slowing of clocks on jets. For real effects, some other theory is needed than special relativity. Secondly, the reality of simultaneous organic causal flows that cannot be relativized. For example, even the lightning bolts that Einstein famously relativized cannot be relativized when taken in the same context as the rose, as a dynamic, organic, causal flow of forces in that storm system that simply could not be relativized. But Dr. Ellis, in his approach, displays neither of these understandings. Let's go to Bernard Carr. In his talk, Making Space and Time for Consciousness in Physics. In special relativity, there are many strange behaviors of time, he notes. The twin paradox, which he says we know is correct. So he's simply accepting all the problems of the twin paradox is going to just hover around this model then, this space-time block or manifold again. But in this case, we note that the space-time manifold is a bunch of world lines. The brain would be a whole bunch of world lines. The coffee cup would be a whole bunch of world lines. But at what scale of time is this manifold? It could be the scale of buzzing electrons, electron crowds, as opposed to the coffee stirring scale. At one scale, the brain, a couple of just, like I said, clashing little billiard balls or worse. As such, how do you get the experience of coffee being stirred out of this over an extended period of time? Further, all math models are discrete states, instants. There is no explanation of continuity. For that, you would need memory, but they have no such explanation. Never. That's always ignored in these models. So Dr. Carr has no idea. He never actually formulates the question. He just hopes that pushing the coffee stirring, that is the experience, into a higher dimensional space, like he's showing here, will take care of the problem. He proposes, you've got 3 dimensions of space, 3D, 1 of time, and then an orthogonal dimension, T2 there, the 5th dimension, where he's going to stick experience, the coffee stirring, extremely magically. Oh, and don't forget, these are just slices again of 5D space. Again, slice after slice after slice. What is providing the continuity of the stirring experience? Never addressed. Never, ever. Jonathon Schooler, Distinguished Professor, Psychological Brain Sciences, University of California, Santa Barbara. His talk, Could Postulating 3 Dimensions of Time Address Assorted Disparities Between Physics and Experience? He notes fundamentals, that these are in effect the hard problem. For example, experience exists, like coffee stirring. Experience is defined by change. Time flows. Experience is always now. Now is special. And he even throws in experience is impacted by decisions. We have free will. And he says there is no room for any of this in the current contemporary science. And he quotes the physicist Paul Davies, quote, nothing in known physics corresponds to the passage of time. Indeed, physicists insist that time doesn't flow at all. It merely is. Just one of many quotes one could take from physicists. And he notes, Jonathon Schooler, a subjective dimension of time. The psychological importance experience of time varies dramatically based on the situation, accidents, aging, mania versus depression, etc. But now he simply assumes, accepts as reality the block universe. He notes essentially this problem, as I'd put it. The world lines are the physical observer. So where I've got that picture of the one observer of one dimension going along 2 dimensions, should be 3 of world lines, that the world lines, those 2D, actually could be 3D or 4D, events are the observer. There's no difference. That's the physical observer. So how do you get motion? Because that's all static. So he says to reduce motion and experience, an observer, that is a disembodied consciousness, must move through the world lines. Now that picture I took there is from Dunn in a book, An Experiment with Time, 1927, which I'm not sure Schooler even knows about. And also, there's John Smythe's 2003 Journal of Consciousness Studies, Spacetime and Consciousness, who's also tried to float this idea that we could solve the hard problem by simply having disembodied consciousnesses move along the 4-dimensional frozen space-time block. So he notes what's missing, as we've noted. You need another degree of freedom to move through that 4D block, to enable consciousness to move in relation to physical time. He says if we imagine a subjective dimension of time, this allows a degree of freedom to move through the block universe. And he shows this picture. So you have the block universe, an observer moving through it, but another dimension with the successive moments of now, okay, that is experience. In other words, He's just throwing experiences into this dimension. In other words, the problem of experience, how we get coffee cups from the billiard balls or floating parachutes, is just gratuitously taken care of, assumed. And then you ask, well, since this again just slices, just as he shows, where does the continuity come from? How is it that coffee stirring is seen as continuous, as rather than sliced, then another slice, then another slice, never more than one slice? And of course, there's no explanation needed as to how they arise from billiard balls in the brain, because, well, again, gratuitous assumption, it's just all assumed. But not to worry, he even adds a sixth dimension to handle the different scales of time, as I would call buzzing flies versus heron-like flies, as he talked about in an earlier slide, where accidents can change the scale of time, etc. So I don't know where you'd put this dimension, but here I'll add the dimension. You could have buzzing flies. You could have a heron-like fly with a much slower stirring coffee. You could have a coffee that looks like a pile of electrons with a heron's ensemble of electron cloud, etc. You can imagine all possible scales of time for all experiences must be represented on this particular dimension. And again, you might note, if this seems far out, in reality, I think some of these physicists would think that my LSD perception, which tries to explain this in terms of taking LSD as an example, a cardinal absorbent acting upon the brain as a mass of oscillating neurons, and increasing the rate, the velocity of that oscillation, therefore slowing the scale of time up to a point, given the degree of LSD, that would probably be considered far out. But yet, this is not far out. Interesting situation. So, just in my opinion, a surrender to a current logical mess in physics based on a failure to assess special relativity properly. Now, Smolin, his talk, the role of qualia in temporal naturalism. Interesting. I never did quite figure out how Smolin thought he accounted for qualia via his scheme. Actually, he has the same problem as everyone else. But Dr. Smolin is an absolutely special case here, because he's trying to account for the time evolution of the universe, the emergence of instant after instant of time. Actually, he takes events as the unit, event after event emerging, events causing events. And he's doing this with entirely new principles that ultimately dovetail with laws of physics. He throws in lots of mathematics that seems to correspond with physical laws like conservation of momentum, etc. He is almost Bergsonian. This slide, a prelude. Suppose the world is based on one distinction between the definite and the indefinite. A quantum measurement takes an indefinite state to one that becomes definite. So indefinite to the definite. Okay, what is emergent? Space, space-time, fields, particles. Somehow now we're going to get quantum measurements causing the entire emergence of space-time. Interesting. Time is a process which continually brings into being novel events. By doing so, they transform what were a moment ago future event, and thus potential events, into first, present, then past events. These are, by the way, as he presented the slides. So one can sense the resonance with Bergson's vision of the universe, hesitating at each moment before possibilities, where Bergson says time is this hesitation or it is nothing. Here's where I think qualia simply sneaks in. He says, the universe, Smolin does, the universe is nothing but a large number of partial views of itself, making up a briefly present. These create and react to each other as they explore the ways that a universe can be. So the views, partial views, interact with each other. So again, we're back to, well, who is viewing? I mean, a view implies a who viewing. We're back to what scale of time is the viewing going? we have to come up with a scale of time. We just got world lines otherwise. In other words, how do the billiard balls become coffee cups and stirring spoons? That is, how do we get perceived events? Well, continuing on the views of events, his fourth hypothesis, only views of novel or unique events which have no precedents or copies are correlates of conscious perceptions. Again, perceptions are just going to be gratuitous here. Fifth hypothesis, each frame conscious perception. Now, framed conscious perception means, well, something like Whitehead's epics. We're putting little demarcation lines around events. So each frame conscious perception corresponds to the top level of a hierarchy of unprecedented views of composite physical events. So we're seeing how the origin of the image of the qualitative image of the external world is being gratuitously solved here. Just experiences just exist, as in Kastrup's idealism. And as I said, this is all obviously has close affinities to Whitehead's epics, and it will have all the same problems. See my number 53 on Whitehead. He says, the universe is ordered causally in terms of events. Each event has a causal past. The causal past of every event is unique. That is unlike any other causal past of any other. Again, resonance is to Bergson's vision of time. Each moment in the indivisible flow, like a melody, is unique, reflecting its entire past, the previous history of the entire musical phrase, etc. But then he says this interesting thing. I think there's something fundamentally non-mathematical about how the universe exists and evolves. So Dr. S here, we need to understand, is trying to build a theory of the projection of the physical world, a process that precedes any possibility of the mathematical treatment of physics. Okay, that the creation of the physical world instant by instant is via a process that's not mathematically described. Well, it's very similar to Bergson, where we noted there's an intensive order. Think Beethoven, the intensive order of the Ninth Symphony in his mind. So an intensive order, consciousness, inextended. And for Bergson, a relaxation of this tension of the inner aspect of physical being. That's projection matter, extended matter. But as extensity, think the lake there and the shore, transforming indivisibly in duration, melodically, indivisibly. But physics comes along and says, well, we look at that extensity and we see it casting a network or mesh of network over it as the 3D continuum of points positions, where time is simply the fourth dimension, the instance, as something moves across point after point after point in that continuum. This is the basis of the mathematical order, geometrizing extensity. It's an ideal limit for Bergson. An ideal limit never reached, this 3D continuum of points positions with its abstract time. So the temporal metaphysic, duration, extensity, duration, indivisible, non-instant by instant motion. The classic metaphysic, the abstract space, with abstract time, the fourth dimension of the abstract space. The classic metaphysic of space and time, again, simply the ideal limit of the temporal metaphysic. The classic metaphysic of space and time, that abstract space, has no positive reality. It has no ontological status. You can't start any theory and actuality from it, especially a theory of consciousness, because it has no positive reality. It doesn't actually exist. Physics inherently tries to claim the opposite. For example, those little points there are discrete chunks, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeter square, or the change is happening in terms of quantum jumps that are discrete, mathematical collapses of probability. Even in Bergsonians, I should say, one sees this continued attempt to subordinate the temporal metaphysic to the quote-unquote reality of physics, that is, the classic metaphysic. But that's inverting the whole situation, the whole process. But Smolin is very, as you see, very close to this. That is, that intensive order and the relaxation into extensity and duration is not describable by the abstract continuum of points positions with this fourth dimension of abstract time. Not in actuality, only in practicality, but not with true ontological reality or status. Dr. Smolin is appealing to a different, logically prior metaphysic, but with no acknowledgement of it, no apparent awareness of it as far as I can see. But back to our theme. Just for the sake of an image, Dr. Smolin is building his laudable, almost Bergson-like edifice atop a pile of uncritically accepted tofu blocks of physics. In Time Reborn, I noted he simply accepts the current interpretation as the mess of special relativity to include the twin paradox. To my knowledge, he has never accepted this. He's never seen special relativity as purely explaining measurement effects, therefore explaining basically nothing with ontological reality. Note, the above includes the status of special relativity's explanation, quote unquote, of Michelson and Morley at the experiment. Thus, the status of the ether. That's in limbo. The Copenhagen framework of quantum mechanics, perfectly accepted. You just saw that in the initial slide. With its zero ontology, mathematical probabilistic collapse, detested by Schrödinger. But Dr. Smolin is fine with this. General relativity, pure mathematical structure, no ontology, for which, as far as gravity would go, as I noted, Newton would still say hypothesis non fingo. I feign no hypothesis about what gravity actually is. For Lee, no problem. You're not going to build a profound conception of this universe, which includes the reality, the necessary existence of a different metaphysic, namely Bergson's temporal metaphysic, to include the nature of mind on top of a foundation littered with problems that you simply are ignoring, especially when the nature of time is central to the problem. But this includes each and every one of the participants in this conference, at least so far, the first four. There was a discussion in the conference, so we'll have one here, except I'm the only one that gets to discuss anything, so that's the way it goes. So physics is dead until they grasp and accept the logical structure of special relativity and realize it has nothing to do with time. Bergson very reluctantly, didn't want to get into it, tried to set them straight in duration and simultaneity. A.P. French, physics professor, MIT, agreed. Special relativity is only dealing with measurement effects, not real ontological effects. You can't explain these. Both were ignored. A favorite for Bergson didn't know math. He wasn't acquainted with modern mathematics, which really makes no sense because he wasn't that far in the past or from these developments. I just saw this argument the other day with a philosopher of science relative to a review I did of his book on physics on Amazon. Kind of the same. Bergson was, he's got a bad reputation. The reality, at the age of 18, 1877, Bergson won a prestigious French National Prize, a competition in mathematics. In 1879, his professor, I think it can be pronounced Devove, published solutions to a set of problems Pascal left behind without solutions, among them Bergson's. The judgment of a mathematics professor, Devove, I think. You could have been a mathematician. Instead, you will be a mere philosopher. But Bergson thought there were better problems to look at. Einstein, we know, got some help, for example, from Minkowski. In my humble opinion in math, Bergson would have left Einstein in the dust, just my intuition. To physics, I would say, How beneficial to all this would be. Put the Bergson dumb mythology to bed. Make a start with, say, this one of the many problems in the current framework, the logical structure of special relativity. Once again, for a much deeper look at this subject, time, consciousness, Bergson, Gibson, the problems of AGI, AI, take a look at this book. Next we'll see. Till then, signing off.